Good afternoon, and welcome to the Côte-Saint-Luc edition of the 2021 CBC Canada Reads. My name is Lisa, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. We're so happy to be here once again for our version of this battle royale. Since we can't be together in person, I want to give you an outline of how this event is going to run. Each defender will have 5 minutes to talk about their book, to convince us why theirs is the one book that best fits this year's theme of one book to transport us. I'll be keeping time and will let them know when they have 1 minute left. After that, I'll be asking each of them a question, and later they'll have a chance to tell us what they didn't like about their books. Finally, based on what they've heard from their fellow panelists, who are they going to eliminate from the running? All right. Bear with me. Okay, we will then give you, the audience, the chance to ask any of the panelists a question. You can do this by writing your question in the chat or in the Q&A box. If you want to ask your question out loud, please raise your Zoom hand and we'll unmute you so we can hear you ask your question. While question period is going on, I'll also be asking those of you who are able to do so to vote for the winner. Again, this through your chat box, your Q&A box, in those fashions. We'll announce the winner at the end of today's program. The order in which you'll hear from our panelists has already been predetermined, and our first defender this afternoon is Jennifer.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again this year. As you can see from my background, I'm doing some preliminary celebrations in the hope that my book wins. I have my good luck trophy. So just remember to vote for my book. And which book is that, you ask? Well, today I'll be talking about The Midnight Bargain. C.L. Polk is a fantasy writer from Calgary. Her debut novel, Witchmark, won the 2019 World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. Her latest novel, The Midnight Bargain, is a journey filled with magic, love, and self-determination. So think the TV series Discovery of Witches meets the world of the Bridgertons. According to the CBC, it richly depicts a world filled with oppressive customs designed to shackle women's powers and confine them to a lackluster life during childbearing years. It will take hold of the imagination and compel the reader to side with the outlier and measure their own mental fortitude to that of the protagonist. The novel is set in a fantasy land named Chasseland that feels much like the Regency era in England. Beatrice Claiborne dreams of magic and freedom. A talented young sorceress who hides her magical skills, she is torn between her own wants and her sense of responsibility to her family. Beatrice lives in a patriarchal world where most people have some magical talent. However, only young men are trained in magic and inducted into a magical society. Girls are allowed to learn minor magic, but are never taught higher skills. Instead, they're meant to marry. The idea of marriage is terrifying to Beatrice because it means that she'll be locked into a neck collar that will cut off her magic to protect her unborn children. But her father, on the other hand, is determined that she will find a husband in this year's seasons of parties and balls, which is known as the bargaining season. To achieve her goal and become a full-fledged mage, Beatrice has secretly taught herself magic from grimoires. But when she eventually finds the one grimoire that she really needs, Isabetta Lavin, another sorceress, snatches it away from her. And to help her get it back, Beatrice summons a minor spirit named Natty. And in return for its help, the spirit has a price. Of course it does. And what is that price? It's Beatrice's first kiss with none other than Isabetta's brother, Lance Lavin. So as the story continues, the choices that once were so clear to Beatrice become more difficult. If she casts the spell to become a mage, she will devastate her family and destroy her chance to be with the man she loves. But if she marries, she'll lose her magic, her dreams, and everything that makes her who she is. So basically, Beatrice must make a choice and live with the consequences of her decision. In The Midnight Bargain, magic represents a source of political and physical power that only a select group is permitted to wield. It is a talent that anyone can possess, but requires opportunities and trainings to flourish. And these depend heavily on gender, class, and finances. Such concepts may have many parallels in our own society today. Indeed, the book is an actual commentary on our obsession with wealth and how wealth elevates our social class and makes you more respectable. The novel is compelling, fast-paced, and highly entertaining. It sweeps you away to Chasselan, a dazzling world of ballrooms and vibrantly colored fashion. However, don't let this beautiful setting fool you. Every woman in this book has a role to play. Each felt the brunt of societal repression and chose to react in different ways. Beatrice is brave and independent. She fights for control of her life and refuses to back down. Some may say her actions are those of a selfish woman, but I don't really agree. It is society and her family that are actually selfish. Beatrice isn't willing to go ahead and do what society wants her to do. The theme of this year's CBC Canada Reads is one book to transport us, and it is absolutely perfect timing. 2020, as we all know, was very difficult and challenging. And as we sit here defending our titles, we're reminded that books are meant to take us to another place. The reader are supposed to lose ourselves among the pages and explore new ideas and situations. The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk certainly accomplishes all of this. It takes us on a journey through a fantasy world, but keeps our mind active by presenting social issues. It is the perfect gem of a book and should win this year's Canada Reads debate. And in case you're forgetting, here's my lovely badge. It says Vote Midnight Bargain. And that's me, Jennifer, defending this book by C.L. Polk. Back to you, Lisa.
All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Next up is Antonella.
Hi, everyone. So the book I'm defending today is actually the perfect fit for this year's theme, which is one book to transport us. This book transported me deep into the forest, coastline, countryside, and mountains of Taiwan. It's a memoir. It's called Two Trees Make a Forest, written by Canadian writer Jessica J. Lee. She returns to her mother's homeland of Taiwan to understand the landscape that shaped her family and in turn shapes her. The book intertwines her grandparents' histories, the political history of Taiwan, and the island's geological and natural history. It all starts with the discovery of letters written a decade ago by her immigrant grandfather as his mind began to drift into dementia. Lee grew up in Ontario, not too far from her grandparents. Despite this, in many ways, she felt like she did not really know them. They talked little about the past, and though her family held a close connection to Taiwan, Lee knew very little about their life there. The discovery of the letters was the impetus that led Lee to her ancestral homeland of Taiwan. The book flips back and forth between Lee's family and the history of Taiwan through Lee's many hikes through the landscape. Interspersed with the lush descriptions of her hikes are her reflections on Taiwan's history. And along the way, we discover the many aspects of her grandparents' lives that had been unknown to her. Taiwan is a small island of big extremes, towering mountains, lush forests, and rugged coastlines, ever changing through constant earthquakes, monsoons, mudslides, and a history of volcanic activity. As the author navigates this tumultuous terrain, she finds herself also traveling through language, memory, and history as she searches for the pieces of her family left behind. And in this way, Two Trees Make a Forest brings together Lee's family history in Taiwan and the natural history of the island, showing the reader how the land is shaped by people and how people shape the land. Lee tells the story of how her grandparents moved from China to Taiwan and then on to Canada, interspersed with stories of colonialism and Taiwanese mythology, descriptions of plants, birds, and even the formation of the island itself. Through the book, we follow Lee as she hikes mountains home to birds found nowhere else on Earth, swims in a lake of drowned trees as she bikes flatlands by the coast where rare spoonbills are found, and learns about a tree whose fruit can float in the ocean for years. Throughout the book, Lee points to parallels between the natural and human stories that have shaped her family and their beloved island. Always attentive to the natural world, Lee also discusses the island's colonial and more recent political history and how these have impacted her family's history. Two Trees Make a Forest is a genre-shifting book. It is in parts history, travel, nature, and memoir. The sum of its parts is a story showing how nature can be interweaved with history and family. Lee's depiction of Taiwan's nature and landscape is rich and vibrant. I would like to read an excerpt from the book that I believe best captures the author's tone and intentions. I was 27 when I went to Taiwan for the second time. My first visit since I was a baby. It was 2013. Grandfather had returned there and died a few years earlier, and my mother and I had gone to visit his remains. He had died alone, his memories wasted. It felt, to us, an irrevocable betrayal, though we'd had no say in what had happened and we couldn't have changed it. Decades had passed since my mother had emigrated, but the island had called my family back. My mother began to talk about returning for good when she retired. I saw the ways she had tried on a different life on a different continent, and how it bristled speaking a language she'd inherited, asking her children questions in Mandarin and receiving replies in English. We mocked her errors, as children do, and she would reply, "Well, you speak Chinese then," jokingly, though I sensed a loss in her tone. I saw in Taiwan something of the ways that places draw us in, and sometimes push us away again. And there grew in me an inarticulate longing. Back to you, Lisa.
Oh, you got that in just in time. All right. Next is Merade.
Hi, everyone. My name is Merade, and I am championing the book Butter, Honey, Pig Bread by Francesca Equiasi. So firstly, I want to apologize for any mispronunciations. A lot of the words and names in this book are a little bit foreign to me. So I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the author. Francesca Equiasi is a writer and multidisciplinary artist. She was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and currently lives in Halifax. She identifies as queer. Butter, Honey, Pig Bread was longlisted for the 2020 Giller Prize, in addition to being a contender in this year's Canada Reads competition. Butter, Honey, Pig Bread is Francesca's magnificent debut novel. This is a novel about family, faith, food, and forgiveness. It explores Nigerian culture and folklore, and it takes place in Halifax, Montreal, London, and various parts of Nigeria. Butter, Honey, Pig Bread tells the tales of three Nigerian women, Kambiranachi and her twin daughters, Kehinde and Taye. Kambiranachi claims she is an Obanji, a non-human spirit who causes misfortune and misery to all she loves by being born and then dying as an infant, bringing suffering to her human mother. She has made the unnatural decision to stay alive, to love her human family, but she is terrified of the ramifications of her decision. A fear that appears to come true when Kehinde, the younger twin, experiences something terrible and traumatic that tears the family apart and divides her daughters for years. Kehinde left Lagos at the age of 18 and has never returned. She cuts herself off from her twin on purpose. Kehinde struggles to come to terms with what has happened to her while creating a life for herself alone in Montreal. But underneath it all, she is angry and resentful. Taye, meanwhile, is consumed with remorse over her sister's suffering and flees, attempting to fill the void left with casual flings with women, drugs, and alcohol. She finally finds a way to escape her suffocating depression by pursuing her love for food and cooking. Taye and Kehinde have now returned to Lagos after living apart for more than a decade. If the three women are to heal and move on, they must confront each other and resolve the wounds of the past. Throughout this book, food plays an important role, as you can probably tell from the title. For Taye, the older twin, when they were born, she tended to be the quieter of the two twins. Kehinde, the younger sister, spoke for her. But after this traumatic event and over a decade of being apart and having little of a relationship, words are difficult to come by because Taye is still a quiet, shy girl, and her relationship with Kehinde is totally shattered. As a result, speaking is difficult. Food and cooking fill that silence. It becomes a way for the women to express love, longing, worry, regret, and the desire for forgiveness. Taye prepares jollof rice, smoked salmon, curry chicken, and a salted caramel chocolate cake for Kehinde's homecoming feast. It is a peace offering, but is also a distraction because she does not want to talk about the years that have passed or the incident that caused the rift between them. Of her book, Equiasi says, "I love to cook, to read about food, and watch shows about food. I really wanted the book to feel sensual, separate from sex. The descriptions of food and cooking are very sensual." I'd like to read one of my favorite passages from the book. In it, Taye decides to bake a cake for Kehinde's homecoming. As a detour from the undesirable path which her mind wanted to wander, Taye abruptly decided that she would make a cake to celebrate Kahinde's homecoming, and jollof rice with smoked fish, curried chicken, and soft-boiled eggs. A feast, Taye said, and lifted Coca-Cola's soft body from her lap to the cold tiled floor. She made a cup of Lipton tea with condensed milk and honey, the first offerings from her beloved hive. She fished a foil-wrapped block of butter out of the overstuffed freezer to let it thaw on the counter by the open window. Then she listened for the low humming of her bees. This is how you make a salted caramel chocolate cake for your twin sister, whom you haven't seen in, God, a long time, in hopes that you avoid talking about things you haven't been talking about and just eat in silence. For the batter, you will need as much butter as you can manage without leaving your cake too dense and greasy. Taye would die in pure bliss if she were to drown in a tub of butter. So she used plenty. She should use a little over 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 a cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, preferably fair trade. No need to have the exploited labor of children on your hands just for chocolate. A teaspoon and a half of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 3 large eggs. You may add a cup of sugar, but Taye used a cup of honey instead. And finally, some vanilla extract. In place of buttercream frosting, Taye made honey caramel to pour over the cake. Faith is another important theme in this book. Often in media, queer people are depicted as having to choose between their identity and their religion, where the characters are struggling to reconcile their queerness or are trying to come out. Francesca Equiasi wanted Taye's main struggle to be centered around her queerness. Equiasi says, "My faith is very important to me and I am queer, and that's just a fact. There are people in my life whom I love dearly, and my queerness causes so much tension. I wanted to show both sides, where it could be a big deal, and then this character who doesn't need to do any reconciling." Taye finds comfort in her Catholicism. It is possible to be queer and still love and find comfort in your faith. So how does this book, Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread, fit into the theme? The theme, one book to transport us. Why do I think Butter, Honey, Pig is the book for that? There's an obvious answer. This book takes place over 3 continents. We get to experience Lagos, Nigeria, London, Montreal, Halifax, and even a little bit of France. Equiasi does an amazing job of transporting us around the world, but the story is also told in a non-linear time structure, moving us through not only these places on Earth, but also through time. Kambiranachi does not believe herself to even be human, and therefore does not exist in time the same way we do. Francesca says, we time travel, even if it's just in our imaginations or our memories with scents and food triggers. So Lagos is a very specific flavor. It's spicy palm oil. It's a meal. You're full. You need to rest after you've eaten. I feel like Halifax is a snack in the best possible way. I wanted to illustrate that, and time was a helpful way to do that. In the book, Equiasi uses the word anamoya, which means nostalgia. 2 seconds. And nostalgia for a time or place you've never experienced. And I feel this describes Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread perfectly. You know, I'm not Nigerian. I'm not a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm not a person of color. But this book makes me want to curl up and eat these delicious foods she describes. Bake a salted caramel chocolate cake, which is what I think all of us have been doing during the past year. And in the coming year, hopefully we will get to hug family members and travel to new places. This is a novel about forgiveness and healing. So vote for Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread.
All right. We're facing some challenges here, keeping the time down. Next up is Talene.
Thank you, Lisa. So the book I'm defending today is Johnny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. Johnny Appleseed is a compelling, eye-opening, and profound story that combines the hardships of both Indigenous life and queer life. So it is the story of Johnny, nicknamed Johnny Appleseed, who is a young, resilient, two-spirit, Indigenous, and queer individual. So he was born on the reserve from the OG Cree tribe to a family of very modest means. After his grandmother's death, Johnny decides to leave his family and his home on the res to live in Winnipeg. So in the big city, Johnny needs to make his living. He becomes a cyber sex worker and makes money by selling himself online through video chats with men. So to get a better sense of Johnny's character, here's a little excerpt from the book. I figured that I was gay when I was 8. I stayed up late after everyone went to bed and watched Queer as Folk on my Kokum's TV. She had a little satellite and all the channels, pirated, of course. At the time, my mom and I were living with my kokum, his grandmother, because my dad had left us thinking he was Dolly Parton or Garth Brooks or something. Queer as Folk aired at midnight on Showcase. I muted the channel, added subtitles, and watched as 4 gay men live their lives in Pittsburgh. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to have lofts and go to gay bars and dance with cute boys. I wanted to work in comic shops and universities, be sexy and rich. I wanted that. So as you can see, the book is written in the first person, which really enables the reader to get a unique, raw, and genuine perspective of Johnny's life. It also ensures that Johnny, who is a marginalized individual in society, is given a voice and thus empowered. The book is character and relationship driven and not plot driven. Johnny's memories from his childhood and his early adolescence are interwoven into the overall plot. We hear particularly of his kokum, his grandmother, whom he loved very much. And he also tells us about his first friend and his first lover, T.S. So each character is developed beautifully, and we get a good sense of their feelings, emotions, goals, aspirations in life. So the plot essentially begins when Johnny gets a call from his mother. His stepfather has passed away, and she asks him to join her for the funeral. So Johnny has 1 week to make enough money to pay all the expenses to go back to the reserve and attend the funeral. And this is despite the fact that he had an awful relationship with his stepfather, Roger. So with the news of his stepfather's death at the beginning of the novel and his funeral that takes place towards the end, the author creates this framework with which to portray and discuss Johnny's two-spirit identity. See, Roger didn't approve of both Johnny's queerness and his indigenousness, referring to him as an apple, red on the outside, but white on the inside. So in this sense, his stepfather epitomizes all the oppression that Johnny has suffered for being both Indigenous and queer. So because he is two-spirit, he has had a hard time fitting into his overall environment. So considered not Indigenous enough on the reserve for being queer, and yet being fetishized for being Indigenous from the men he encounters in Winnipeg. So this intersectional identity is at the heart of Joshua Whitehead's story about Johnny. So why is this a book that transports us? So while the whole plot itself spans only a week's worth of time, Johnny's memories act as flashbacks and send the reader throughout his tumultuous past. By learning about his childhood and his adolescence, we are being transported through time, going from the past back to the present, from one memory to the other. The reader really feels like they have entered Johnny's mind. And the mind, as we know, is a wondrous and wandering place. We as the reader are also being transported to new spaces. Firstly, Indigenous spaces. Johnny's stories bring the reader to the realities of Indigenous life, of a life on the reserve, a life that most likely feels to many non-Indigenous readers. With each and every character outlined in this novel, Joshua Whitehead succeeds in portraying the way Indigenous people are forced to live and get on with their lives. How it is normal for them to scroll through a million posts about missing girls on Facebook. While this life may feel so far away from most of us, in reality, it is happening in our own backyards, in neighborhoods not far from us, right here in Canada. So in the same way, Johnny's life transports the reader into queer spaces. So spaces that are misunderstood, that lack acceptance, spaces of abuse and bullying, spaces that have suffered trauma, and spaces with different ideas about sexuality. So in sum, with Joshua Whitehead's not-so-fictional character, Johnny, and the detailed accounts of his memories, emotions, feelings, and thoughts about both pain and love, expressed in the first-person narrative, the reader really feels like they are being transported to a new world, as if they are immersing themselves into Johnny's body. So vote for Johnny Appleseed. Thank you, Lisa.
Talene. Okay. Thanks, Talene. Next up, our last defender is Maria.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm defending Hench by Natalie Sina Walshott. She is a freelance writer, author of 2 poetry books, and community manager from Toronto. Hench is one book that transports us, fitting the theme of Canada Reads. The writer takes us out of our minds into a world of superheroes and villains, populated by relatable and complex characters. A different world, but not in an unfamiliar way. Hench is such a good read. I laughed and cringed and couldn't put the book down. And even once I finished it, my mind just kept going to one scene or to another. The author's imagination and her fantastic storytelling captured me. Her wit and smart dialogue, fast-paced style with many wonderful twists that explore themes that run deep and resonate long after finishing the book. The story follows Anna Trommelov, a low-level henchwoman who does administrative work for supervillains. Her work usually involves data entry, and though it can be boring, it pays her bills. With her friend's help, she gets a job through an employment agency and is hired as a hench to a minor supervillain. She does not work on the field, so her job is not dangerous until she finds herself summoned by her boss, Electric Eel, who is holding a press conference, and all of a sudden, she's caught in the center of the action and badly injured by superhero Super Collider, who comes to the rescue of the mayor's son, held captive for ransom. Super Collider crashes through the window, saving the boy, but killing multiple henches and shattering Anna's femur in the process. Upon learning that her surgically repaired leg will take 6 months to heal, a laid-off Anna moves in with her best friend, fellow hench June. She's again without a job and with no money. A frustrated Anna decides to turn to data analysis and damage projection by creating a spreadsheet where she calculates how many dollars and life years the Super Collider and so other cult heroes have cost, not just her, but the world at large. A smart Anna is angry and desperate. She publishes her findings in a blog she names the Injury Report. This brings notoriety and the attention of one of the world's most infamous supervillains and Super Collider's arch nemesis, Leviathan, who also turns out to be a decent employer. Leviathan gives Anna safety and limitless resources to continue her work and to use her research to apply stressors on superheroes, weaponizing information and public opinion, and the stakes are raised as each side takes aim at the other. Evocative prose, acerbic wit, propulsive pacing complement Walshcott's plot, which juxtaposes profundity with action. Boldly drawn characters of different ethnicities, sexualities, and gender identities engage in realistically complex relationships that evolve and devolve over the course of the tale, illustrating the relativity of good and evil and the corrupting influence of power. What Hench is very successful at is larger societal observations and critiques. There are parallels between the heroes and the damage and cost inflicted by, say, a military action. There is commentary on the role of social media in spreading misinformation and fake news, the way that the superpowered members of society act with impunity and are glorified to the point of being worshipped. It is impressive the way the author is able to extract some of these finer points which are typically ignored in superhero stories. To summarize, Super Collider looms large in Anna and Leviathan's motivations. And as we follow Anna's rise through the ranks to become an important lieutenant, we cannot avoid the thought of what being good or bad really means. What if by doing good, harm is caused to innocent people? Hench delivers a fascinating moral tale with no moral characters. Both heroes and villains are deeply flawed, both willing to do evil things, the heroes to step on top, the villains to take them down. This book certainly fits this year Canada Reads theme because Hench is immersive and pure reading delight. Walcott clearly knows her comics, and her storytelling is sheer pleasure. From Anna's defensive snarkiness to the novel's dynamic handling of scenes to the final confrontation between Anna and Super Collider, which will have readers cheering and cringing in equal measures. Back to you, Lisa. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. That was great. So next up, I'm going to ask each defender a question. So everybody can unmute your images. Great. All right, so Talene, I'm going to ask you the first question. What's the significance of Johnny's return to his home on the reserve?
A very good question, Lisa. So Johnny's return home essentially helps him revisit and rediscover his identity, and that's both within himself and within his community. In ancient Greek literature, actually, we very often see this theme of return home, which the Greeks called nostos, and think of Odysseus and his 10-year journey back to Ithaca. And even for the Greeks, this return home wasn't just about physically going home, but it was about a return to a previous identity and to a previous life. So in chapter 3 of the book, Johnny even says, home isn't a space, it's a feeling. You have to feel home, and to feel it, you have to sense it, smell it, taste it, and hear it. His return home is a way for him to revisit old sentiments of love and care, especially from his memories of his mother and his kokum, his grandmother. But also to rediscover feelings of hate, abuse, trauma, which came from his peers at school, his stepfather, Roger, and just more broadly, the whole Peguis First Nation community, who struggles to accept his queerness. So Johnny's returning to a place where he knows he can never be his complete self, but at the same time, there is a comfort in returning to the res, where everyone understands what it means to be Indigenous, and not the stereotype, but the real living, breathing culture.
All right. So, Merade, what do you feel the supernatural elements play in this novel?
Kambiranachi's belief that she's an Obanji plays a significant role in her life and her relationship with her daughters. The novel explores what it means about her perception of herself. She's a woman who has stolen life and happiness from fate, and she's been paying the price ever since the unfortunate murder of her husband. She truly believes she's an Obanji, which is a spirit that haunts a family by repeatedly being born and dying. Except Kambiranachi enjoyed being alive so much that she left her kin behind to pursue a human life. Her kin come to reclaim her after her beloved husband's death, but Kambiranachi's love of her twin daughters binds her to this world. I feel that Kambiranachi's story is moving and cultural portrayal of mental illness, and that many ways it affects families. I have to say, of the 3 storylines in the book, Kambiranachi's was my least favorite, but I do feel that it was important to the story as it laid the groundwork for the relationship of the mother and the daughters, and how Kambiranachi was never fully able to be there for her twin girls.
All right. So, Maria, after Anna is injured by Super Collider, the most powerful superhero, she becomes obsessed with documenting the negative effects of the actions of superheroes. What does she want to accomplish?
Well, she wants to expose the collateral damage and pain inflicted by superheroes. It's not just revenge that Anna wants. She wants rebalancing power through public image and by stripping away pretense. She wants not only justice for herself and others harmed by heroes, but she also wants people to see and understand the damage and failure of the power system that most people accept without questioning. She wants accountability and transparency and calculated reckoning of the cost of the system she and others are forced to live within. At its core is the imbalance of power assigned to heroes and villains and ordinary people, and the ways in which ordinary people pay for the actions of those powerful people, who in turn spare little to no thought about the larger consequences of their actions. Because the key to everything is data, knowing how to collect it, how to manipulate it, and how to weaponize it, Anna discovers that the line between good and evil is mostly marketing. And with social media and viral videos, she can control the appearance. She proves that good public relations is the only thing that separates heroes from villains.
Sounds very political. All right. Jennifer. Insta-love, YA, fantasy, romance, historical romance. These are some of the words that have been used to describe your book. Why should this book appeal to readers, and why does this book matter?
It's a good question, Lisa. Books are about exploring new worlds, and I would argue that fantasy accomplishes this much more than any other genre out there. You get to learn more about a world that you would not have explored. The author gets to make something up. And I think what the author has done here is to present social issues in a very approachable and accessible manner that even a teenage girl could pick up the book and it would appeal to her. So it transcends a particular audience and it appeals to both young as well as adults. And I wanted to actually remind the audience that C.L. Polk is actually an award-winning author already who has generated here a story with mass appeal. And yes, it includes some romance and insta-love, which is not getting a lot of love online, if I can, no pun intended there. But there's a lot of criticism of this insta-love. But there's also very mature themes in there, like feminist issues, gender issues, classism. And it's also a very fast-paced, easy to read, and beautifully descriptive novel. And books like this do take a lot of flack, unfortunately, and that is like science fiction, fantasy, romantic stuff. But don't dismiss them, or they shouldn't really be dismissed, because in a sense, the Midnight Bargain has already won, because a fantasy book, has actually made it to the shortlist of Canada Reads. So how great is that?
All right. Antonella, how does the author's education and professional background influence this memoir?
That's a good question, Lisa. Thanks for asking it. Actually, Lee is an environmental historian. So before reading this book, I'd never heard of such a thing. So I looked it up, of course. And according to Wikipedia, environmental history is the study of human interaction with the natural world over time, emphasizing the active role nature plays in influencing human affairs and vice versa. In a recent interview, Lee explained, "I'm trained as an environmental historian, and I realized that the language gap for me wasn't about Mandarin necessarily, and it wasn't about filling all the gaps in my grandparents' stories. It was about finding a thing that we have in common, and that was this connection to place." She goes on to explain how she needed to develop a fluency in the landscape of Taiwan to understand her own place in the world. Back to you, Lisa.
All right, great. Well, Antonella, everybody now has given me what they like about their books. Antonella, what was a weakness in your book?
So as a first-generation Canadian myself, I enjoyed reading about Lee's family and traveling through Taiwan's history and landscape with her and looking for her family history. As well, this book is the closest thing to hiking I've ever been. The only critique I have is that sometimes the details were, a little too detailed. While they were mostly interesting, occasionally I got lost in the descriptions of her hikes to Taiwan because of the extensive information she provided about mudslides, mountain formations, and plants and wildlife. And I have to admit that I skimmed over the sections where she took a deep dive into the discussions of geology and botany. You can tell Lee is an academic, and she really did her research and knows her stuff. In fact, this book has an extensive bibliography, about 17 pages long. But I personally would have much rather read a little more about her family and a little less about the various birds and plant species and the many geological features of Taiwan.
All right. What about you, Maria? What was a weakness?
Sorry about that. it is not so much of a weakness, I will say. I found it difficult to find a weakness with my book, with Hench. But if I have to find one, I would say is the slightly open ending. I was left wanting more, but at the same time, it's not so much of a handicap to the book because there is the possibility that there will be more stories to come with these characters. That's
all right. And now, Talene, what did you find was a weakness in your story?
Well, first, I would like to start by saying that weakness is obviously subjective. So it depends on the reader's preferences. So one thing that I would consider a weakness is not necessarily something that someone else would. But in my opinion, one weakness of the book is really the plot itself. And more specifically, that is lacking a broader, more exciting storyline, which left the reader wanting a bit more at times. And especially for those readers who enjoy a more plot-driven story, as I do. And as I mentioned before, the whole plot spans only a week worth of time, and it's essentially just Johnny returning back to his home on the reserve. And the fact that the existing storyline is very non-linear, so you're jumping from one story, one timeline, one memory to the other, it makes it a little difficult to follow at times. However, I do believe that Johnny's memories and the way that in which he recounts them and he recounts his life is more than enough to keep the reader interested and really transported to his world.
Okay. Jennifer, how about you?
Thanks, Lisa. The Midnight Bargain explores many heavy female issues, but in a very light, romantic way or setting. And some readers may think, this is not for me, doesn't really treat the issues very well. However, does this take away from the book? I don't think so. I think it's the right type of balance that allows the reader to immerse themselves in the story without actually feeling that they're being browbeaten on every page with all of the issues. So it's like doom and gloom. And as one critic said, the author's penetrating social critique and deeply felt depiction of one woman's struggle for self-determination are balanced by her charming take on classic Regency romance, an expertly concocted melange of sweet romance and sharp social commentary. So there's actually many layers in this book if you actually stop and give it its due. The author just uses magic and romance to beautifully present them, not actually make light of them. And I think a lot of people have to remember, and I don't know if they realize this when they're reading the book, the main character, Beatrice, is actually very young. She's about 17 years old. So if you're reading it as an adult, you have to almost cast yourself back to your 17-year-old self in order to give the book its due. Like, what were the things you were preoccupied with when you were 17? What were your experiences? And once you do that, the book really comes into its own. It is, after all, Beatrice's journey from a teenage state to adult female and womanhood. Like, what is it to be a woman? And a lot of people have said, and if some of you are actually watching the live debate during the past couple of days, some people have said that the story of the Midnight Bargain has been done before. So why should I read it? Especially when you align it against all my other colleagues up here and the heavy hitters that are on the panel this time around. And I would argue, if you think that, you've actually really missed the point of the book. These female issues are still a problem today, and we shouldn't dismiss them. You know, why is it that a single woman still gets asked, well, why are you still single? Why aren't you married? Why don't you have kids yet? Don't you want to have kids yet? So this still happens. It's actually not over. It's been done. Women are still dealing and grappling with society's image of them and what it thinks a woman is or should be.
All right. And lastly, Merade, what's a weakness in your book?
Like Talene said, weakness is subjective. And of course, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread is almost near perfect book. It's not something I normally read, but it was just so beautifully written. Francesca Equiasi is just a perfect writer. I'd say the one minor weakness is the fact that a lot of the words and phrases in the book are written in Nigerian and they are not translated. Yes, the author did this on purpose. She didn't want to pander to people. But for me, I wanted to understand every single word in the book. So I was constantly stopping to look them up. So it kind of slowed the flow a little bit for me. Now, I was lucky enough. Butter Honey Pig Bread is available on Hoopla with your library card, so you can go get it right away as soon as you vote for it. So in Hoopla, once you see a word you don't know, you can just hover over it and it'll give you a definition, or you can search the web. But I'd say that was the one weakness for me, and just it slowed the flow a little bit.
Right. Well, thank you for that commercial for Hoopla. All right, panelists. So here's your last chance to convince the audience. Based on what you've heard from your fellow panelists, which book do you feel should be eliminated from being the one book to transport us, and why? So Maria, you're up first, please.
This is difficult because all the books are good, and it's tough to eliminate a book. But I will say that Two Trees Make a Forest. Even though the theme of the book is really good and current, it's too wordy. The descriptions are too long. So sometimes it distracts. That would be the flaw for that book, that the reason why I would eliminate that book. The writing was a little bit repetitive sometimes. And it didn't flow. It didn't flow too much because of the non-linear approach. So sometimes you have to backtrack in order to know where you are. That's it.
Okay. And what about you, Jennifer? Which one would you eliminate?
So this was really hard. It's never pleasant because, we're all here trying to jockey for position and vote, and we want the best book to win. And I was debating between two, and like Maria, I was thinking maybe Two Trees. But you know what? I think, sorry, Maria, I'm voting off Henge, because the way I see it, you are my biggest competition in terms of the theme of Canada's this year, one book to transport us. Because as you said before, much like my book, Midnight Bargain, your book is a pure reading delight. So I feel like I need to get rid of you off the panel so people can vote for the Midnight Bargain.
Okay. And what about you, Antonella? You've already taken a...
Yeah, I've already gotten a hit from Maria. Yes, well, I would eliminate Jen's book, Midnight Bargain. I feel like it's not of the same caliber, the fluffiness of magic and love and sorcery, imaginary lands. Sounds like a fun read, but not. No,
you missed the point.
To win. Sorry,
you missed the point. You must reread.
I guess.
Okay, and what about you, Talene? Who are you gonna eliminate?
I'm on the same page with Maria, and yes, it is very difficult to make this decision because all of them were great in their own ways. But the one I would have to eliminate is Two Trees Make a Forest. And for the exact same reason that Maria stated, I did think it was very dry and the story just didn't flow as well as I would have liked to, because of the long descriptions of the flora and the fauna, which obviously are it's the genre of the book, but as an average reader, it was a little hard to get through. And yeah, it was very hard for me to get to the heart of the book. It was a little difficult to understand the humanity of the characters. And yeah, I was getting just distracted by all the explanations.
All right. So Merade, last chance. Who are you going to eliminate?
So I'm on Team Antonella, and I'm going to vote for the Midnight Bargain. Basically, for the same reasons Antonella said, I felt a YA magic. As Jen mentioned, a lot of people said the theme has been done before. I would have liked to have seen it flipped and have, Beatrice be a man whose magic was going to be taken away. But yeah, sorry, Jen, I'm voting Midnight Bargain out. But you guys can vote for Butter Honey Pig Bread because it's the best one here.
All right. Okay, audience. Now it's your turn. I'm going to open the floor to any questions. you can contact us. You can write your question in the chat or in the Q&A box, or raise your Zoom hand so we can unmute you if you'd like to ask your question out loud. It's also time for everyone to start casting your vote. So while we wait to see if there are any questions, we're going to ask everyone to cast their votes to determine which book best fits this year's theme of one book to transport us. So was it Jennifer with The Midnight Bargain, Antonella with Two Trees Make a Forest, Merade with Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread, Talene with Johnny Appleseed, or Hench with Maria? Okay, so we hope you're able to cast your votes on Zoom. Just use your chat box and your or Q&A box, or raise your hand and we will answer your questions. Hopefully there's somebody out there who's interested. I would like to mention while we're waiting is that the debates are currently taking place this week on CBC Radio 1, I believe at 11:05 in the morning on CTV. CBC TV is broadcasting at 1 p.m. In the afternoon, also online at cbcbooks.ca, YouTube, Facebook, and GEM. And the debates will be available to replay online each day. So you can see how our defenders stack up to those, promoting each book every day. So we're going to have...
Lisa, I see two people raise their hands, so I'm going to ask them to unmute themselves. So Gloria, please unmute yourself and ask your question to the panelists.
Please go ahead with your question.
Gloria Levine, please unmute yourself to ask your question.
Okay, well, while we're waiting. Okay.
I'm just going to ask the other person. There's another person that raised their hands. Arlene, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, so I'm going to read a comment. Somebody said, kudos from Marla. Thank you for commenting. Kudos to all of you. Despite not being able to meet in person for this debate this year, you all did an exceptional job representing your books. And you can see our titles are up. Hench with Defended by Maria. Midnight Bargain was Jen. Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread was Merade. Johnny Appleseed is Talene. Two Trees Make a Forest is Antonella. So Carol, hi Carol. First time I did not read the books beforehand, which I'm sorry for. Hold on, I'm having trouble reading your chat. 1 second. Because also the debate, as you said, has been going on for 3 days already. So it's a bit of a spoiler, but we all presented well. Tough, unusual books this season. That's for sure. Okay. They were definitely interesting. And again, remember, we're voting for the book that transports us. So which book did you feel? And transport can mean different things to different people. So it could be literal. It could be more... you're engrossed in the book and suddenly you look up and an hour has passed and you didn't even realize it, or it can immerse you in a world you didn't know about. Okay, so we're getting some votes are coming in. I don't know if there's any questions coming up. We weren't able to, a couple of people who put up their hands, Arlene or Gloria, if you can unmute, you could ask your question. All right, so I think people are counting up who we're getting. Please keep voting. We're happy to hear from you. All right.
Yeah, it looks like Hench is in the lead.
Hench is in the lead. Okay. So Hench is a novel. It's set in a sort of an alternate universe in that, well, it's a world like ours, but it's different in that superheroes exist. And they run around and have impacts on daily lives. So it's almost like they're a business, they're political, they're,
Maria, are you there? Maria?
Yeah.
Yes, here I am.
So Maria has been on this panel since the very beginning that we've been offering this event. I think we're up to 7, 8 years now. And by far and away, she is our reigning champion for the queen of winning Canada Reads. So, Maria, what's your secret to success? So the rest of us, we could sort of, get a little bit of inspiration maybe for next year.
I don't have any advice. It's just...
She's keeping it all to herself.
That by luck, I got to defend. I think that's all. It's the authors that, I was lucky a couple of times with the books that I got to defend, especially this year. I don't read genre books usually, science fiction, fantasy, like Hench, but I have to say I was so surprised. When I got this book to read, I said, ooh la la, but that was a challenge to me, and I enjoyed it from page 1 to the very last one. It's a very readable book, extremely well written, I would say.
Yeah, it was interesting because it's almost, if you like reading, we're so used to the superhero being the point of view and the positive side, and here's it looking at it from the side of the villain side, but also the villain not in a comic book, because usually when we think about like Marvel movies or whatever it is, those are very much comic book styles, and this is like a comic book but written as a novel. So it's kind of taking out those zoom pow effects and putting it on a more real level. I found
that is the most incredible part, because when you see superheroes acting and you see scenes in the books, you are just seeing it as a flash. But here you are imagining it through the descriptions of the author that are amazing. I have to say she writes in a very beautiful way.
I think the second, I'm just noting sort of, we're getting sort of coming up, seems to be butter, honey, pig, bread as a second, in the second place so far. And that's
I'd like to add that butter, honey, pig, bread and Johnny Appleseed are the only two left in the official Canada Reads competition. So...
Interesting.
It was a very interesting point, Merade. Merade and I have been following the debates this year, which we never actually have a chance to do. I don't know if for those of people listening in if they've ever listened to the live debates, this is the first year that they've been so early. They're usually way at the end of March. And so it is very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a debate where there was actually two ties that had to be broken between the voting on the actual CBC official, event that's going on now. I've never seen that. And I guess it just goes to show you what interesting and important books they have. And they're all so like the competition is so fierce that I've never seen that before. So you actually have to have ties being broken.
Funny, there was a comment, one of our listeners said, "You're all very persuasive. Initially, I was a fan of Two Trees, but after your skillful rebuttal and discussions of the various weaknesses, she changed her vote to Hench." Now, my background is science. So some of the things she was talking about the geology and the plants and everything, I like anything ology. So I enjoyed a lot of that stuff. I would have liked a little more, as you said, somebody said, a little more on the personal side. I also think the book could have benefited by having a more detailed maps, because she's a lot of her sort of ruminations on her family's past and the way she fits into that takes place on these sort of meditative walks. And we kind of don't know where she is. I sort of don't know where she is on the island almost. And I'd like to know a little more where she is. I think, yes, that's one big sketch map, but I was looking for more detailed maps of where the hikes were actually taking place. I did look online. I also saw a couple of pictures, I guess from her work, or I don't know if it was the publisher's website. I really don't remember, but her sitting by one of these beautiful waterfalls and the beautiful green water in the jungle. So a lot of the time she's noting how cold or wet it is. And I keep getting the things, is Taiwan warm or is it cold, or how cold is it?
It seems like it rained a lot. To be listed,
what's cold? I understand when you're wet and you're camping, yeah, it could be pretty chilly. So, and it seems to be like, it's a tropical island, but because of the altitude, I guess it can feel pretty chilly. All All right. Well, I think we've heard basically from everybody who was going to.
Yeah. I don't see any more questions, and we're coming up on the end of our hour.
That's right.
I just want to take a moment to thank all my fellow colleagues who graciously agreed to participate every year. Every year I go around and I ask, Canada Reads debate, would you like to participate? And they're like, yes, no problem. So I'm very, very appreciative. It takes sometimes a bit of an effort to get so many people together on a panel, but as usual, they do a bang up job. And I just want to say I'm very, very appreciative of your time and your effort and your commitment to this program. We now have our little following, it seems. We last year, for the first time, had to go downstairs into the auditorium because we couldn't fit upstairs anymore in the shell room. So that was impressive.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. That was the last event we had in the library.
That's right.
We had to lock down for the pandemic. So
Canada Reads.
We miss everyody. And so I think we can say the winner this year.
The winner is Hench. Yeah.
So everybody, you have all the books either available in paper. We're getting some in. We've had a little trouble. The books have been late. Being hard to get in paper format, but we will be if we don't
Overdrive, Hoopla.
With Hoopla, Overdrive. And if you need help, ask Talene. We can we can help you get on if you're not already reading everything electronically already. A couple of new messages.
Thank you to everyone.
Libby is Overdrive. Yes, not everything, but
yes, they are all available on Libby and Overdrive.
Perfect.
And honey butter pig bread is available on Hoopla. That's the only one that I know for certain is on Hoopla.
Johnny Appleseed is on Hoopla as well.
Okay.
Yeah, they're all really good books. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to everyone out there, and we'll see you hopefully next year in person. All right. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.